He controlled the city's underworld with a flick of his wrist. Men died when he nodded. But when the bell of a rundown roadside diner chimed at 2 a.m, the ruthless boss froze. There, wiping down a greasy counter in cheap, slip-resistant shoes, was the woman who had walked out on him 8 months ago, his ex-wife. And beneath her stained apron was a swollen, heavy belly, his heir growing in the slums. The king had found his runaway queen. The smell of stale fry oil and bleach was permanently baked into Clara's skin. It was 2:14 a.m. The neon sign outside the Silver Spoon Diner buzzed with a rhythmic, failing electric hum, flashing blood-red light across the cracked linoleum floor. Clara pressed the heel of her hand against her lower back, arching slightly to relieve the crushing pressure on her spine. She was 34 weeks pregnant. Her ankles, swollen and thick, pulsed against the tight confines of her cheap sneakers. The baby was awake, kicking furiously against her ribs, protesting the long hours on her feet. "Just an hour left, little one," Clara whispered, her voice rough from disuse. She grabbed a grey rag from a bucket of tepid sanitizing water, wringing it out with red, raw hands. The diner was a graveyard. 2 truckers slept in a booth by the back restrooms. A solitary cab driver sat at the far end of the counter, nursing a cold black coffee and staring blankly at a muted television screen. It was safe here, invisible. Clara had spent the last 8 months trading the sprawling, marble-floored estates of the Rossi Syndicate for the quiet anonymity of the city's forgotten edges. She had walked away with nothing. No settlement, no alimony, just a suitcase of clothes and the clothes on her back. Vincent had offered her millions. She knew the price of his money. It was tracking devices, offshore accounts tied to shell companies, and the constant, suffocating grip of his control. She had signed the divorce papers in a cold, sterile lawyer's office, handed over her diamond rings, and vanished. 3 weeks later, in the bathroom of a cheap motel, she had stared at 2 pink lines on a plastic stick. The bell above the glass door jingled. Clara didn't look up immediately. She wiped down the Formica counter, swiping a sticky ring of spilled syrup into her hand. The heavy thud of expensive leather shoes on the cheap floor registered in her mind. Not a trucker, not a cop. Cold wind and the smell of rain swept into the diner, cutting through the stifling heat of the grill. "Booth in the back," a gruff male voice said. "Face the door." Clara's hand stopped moving. The rag slipped from her fingers, dropping back into the bucket with a quiet splash. The blood drained from her face, leaving her lightheaded. She knew that voice. It was Frankie. She forced herself to breathe, keeping her head down. Don't look up. Keep wiping. Maybe they wouldn't notice her. She was wearing a hideous yellow polyester uniform, her hair tied back in a messy, grease-streaked bun. She was 50 pounds heavier, stripped of the designer makeup and silk dresses she had once been forced to wear. She heard a chair scrape against the floor tiles. "Coffee! Black! Bring the whole pot!" Frankie barked toward the counter. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. The fabric stretched tight over her massive stomach. She turned around slowly, reaching for the glass coffee carafe sitting on the burner. Her hands shook violently. The glass rattled against the metal hot plate. She grabbed a thick ceramic mug. She didn't look towards the back booth. She stared straight at the coffee splashing black and bitter into the white cup. Then she felt it. The shift in the room. The sudden, suffocating drop in temperature. It was a physical weight pressing against the back of her neck. She turned around. Vincent was standing halfway between the booth and the counter. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat, the shoulders dark with rain. Beneath it, a 3-piece suit cut from wool so fine it looked like liquid. His dark hair was slightly damp, pushed back from his forehead. His face, usually a mask of terrifying indifference, was slack. He was staring directly at her. More specifically, he was staring at her stomach. The silence in the diner stretched, pulling tight like piano wire. Even the cab driver seemed to sense the apex predator in the room, sinking lower over his cup. Frankie and Dino, standing near the booth, followed their boss's gaze. Frankie's jaw dropped. Dino cursed quietly under his breath. Vincent didn't blink. His dark eyes moved slowly up from the swollen bulge of her abdomen, past the grease stains on her apron, past the exhaustion etched deep into the circles under her eyes, until he finally met her gaze. Clara gripped the handle of the coffee pot until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to run. Her mind screamed at her to drop the glass and sprint out the back door into the alley, but her body was heavy, cumbersome, and exhausted. There was nowhere to run. Not from him. Vincent took a slow step forward. His eyes were entirely black. No warmth, no surprise, just a violent, consuming calculation. The king had been walking the board, and he had just found a piece that was supposed to have been removed from play entirely. Clara. Her name in his mouth sounded like a death sentence. The coffee pot slipped from Clara's grip. It hit the linoleum. The sharp, explosive crash of glass shattering echoed through the quiet diner. Boiling black coffee exploded across the floor, splashing against the hem of Clara's uniform and the toe of Vincent's polished leather shoe. Neither of them looked down. "Sir, you can't be back here!" A voice squeaked from the kitchen pass. Mr. Henderson, the night manager, poked his head out, clutching a spatula. "The counter is closed for cleaning." Vincent didn't even turn his head. He raised one gloved hand, a fraction of an inch. Frankie stepped forward, sliding his hand inside his jacket. He looked at the manager. "Go back to the grill, buddy, and stay there." Mr. Henderson saw the shape under the jacket. He saw the cold deadness in Frankie's eyes. He vanished back into the kitchen without another word. Vincent stepped into the puddle of coffee. Shards of glass crunched under his weight. He stopped on the other side of the counter, mere inches from Clara. He was close enough now that she could smell the rain on his coat, the expensive cedar cologne, and the metallic tang of gunpowder. He had been working. "You're supposed to be in Geneva," Vincent said. His voice was low, smooth, and dangerously calm. It was the voice he used right before he broke someone. Clara took a half step back. Her spine hit the metal ledge of the pie display case. She crossed her arms over her stomach in a purely instinctual gesture of protection. "Geneva is expensive. I sent $3 million to a Swiss account in your name," he stated, his eyes locked on her hands guarding her belly. "I didn't touch it. I didn't want it." Vincent's jaw tightened. A small muscle ticked beneath his left ear. He leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the sticky countertop. He looked at her hands, raw and cracked from bleach. He looked at her shoes. Then his gaze dropped back to her stomach. The baby chose that exact moment to kick, a sharp, visible roll that distorted the fabric of the cheap yellow apron. Vincent froze. He stopped breathing. For a fleeting, fractured second, the terrifying boss of the Rossi family vanished, replaced by a man struck by lightning. He stared at the movement beneath the fabric. "How far along?" he asked. The calmness was cracking. "It's none of your business." Clara shot back, her voice shaking but her chin raised. "We're divorced, Vincent. The papers are signed. You have no right to be here. You have no right to ask me questions." Vincent's eyes snapped up to hers. The shock was gone. The cold fury was back. "Do the math, Clara," he said softly. "You left 8 months and 12 days ago." He gestured sharply to her stomach. "That is not a fresh development. You were pregnant when you left, or you got pregnant the day before you walked out the door. It's not yours." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. It was pathetic, and they both knew it. There had been no one else, not during their marriage, and certainly not in the grueling, desperate months since. Vincent didn't even dignify the lie with a response. He simply stared at her, dissecting her. "You lived in a basement," he observed, his voice devoid of inflection. "You smell like mildew and cheap soap. You are working the graveyard shift in a diner that serves truck drivers and junkies. You have no car. You have no security." "I have freedom," she snapped. "You have a death wish," he corrected. He stood up straight. "Get your coat." Panic flared in Clara's chest. No, I'm working. My shift ends at 3. "Your shift ended the second I walked through that door. Vincent said. He looked over his shoulder. Frankie, find the manager. Pay him for the damage and tell him Clara is resigning. You can't do this! Clara's voice pitched up, breaking the quiet of the diner. The cab driver at the end of the counter finally realized the danger, tossed a $5 bill on the counter, and bolted out the front door. I am doing it, Vincent said. He walked around the edge of the counter, stepping into the staff area. It was a blatant violation of space. The kitchen felt instantly claustrophobic. His sheer physical presence consumed the air. Clara backed away, her hand grasping blindly behind her, until she found a heavy metal serving spoon. It was a laughable weapon against a man who carried a custom Glock under his arm, but she held it tight. Don't come any closer, she warned. I'll scream. I'll call the cops. Vincent stopped. A bitter, cynical smile touched the corners of his mouth. The cops in this district work for me, Clara. You know that. And screaming will only upset the child. He looked at the spoon in her hand. Then he looked at her eyes. You hid my child from me, he said. The volume of his voice didn't rise, but the intensity of it physically pushed her back. You stole my blood. You put my heir in a grease pit on the edge of the city where any rival with a grudge could have found you. Do you have any idea what would happen if the Moretti family found out my pregnant ex-wife was slinging hash on Highway 9? They wouldn't have found out! Clara yelled, tears of frustration finally pricking her eyes. Because I was dead to you. You made sure everyone knew I was gone. You are carrying a Rossi. He pointed a finger at the ground. Right here, in this filth. You put my child in danger. I put your child out of reach, she fired back, breathing heavily. Her back throbbed with a vicious spike of pain. I didn't want him raised in a fortress. I didn't want him learning to check under cars for bombs. I wanted a normal life for him. There is no normal life for us, Clara. Vincent reached out, moving too fast for her heavy body to react. He gripped her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to paralyze her. He took the spoon from her trembling fingers and dropped it on the counter. Coat, now. Clara didn't move. She stared at his hand locked around her wrist. The familiar warmth of his skin against hers sent a sickening wave of nostalgia and terror through her system. Vincent, please, she whispered, the fight suddenly draining out of her. Exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. Her legs trembled. I can't go back to that house. I can't live like a ghost in a museum again. Don't make me do this. For a fraction of a second, his grip loosened. His dark eyes flicked across her face, taking in the hollows of her cheeks, the sheer, crushing fatigue she was carrying. When they were married, she had been radiant, draped in silk, dripping in jewels, protected by an army of men. Now she looked like a broken bird. He had let her go because she had begged him. She had cried on the marble floor of his study, telling him his world was rotting her soul. He had let her leave because he thought his money would keep her safe, far away from the blood of his business. He had been wrong. You aren't going back to the estate, Vincent said flatly. You're coming to the penthouse. It's secure. He let go of her wrist and took her by the elbow, pulling her gently but unstoppably toward the back room. My things, Clara protested, stumbling slightly as she tried to keep up with his long strides. I'll buy you new things. I have a life here. You have a survival strategy. Vincent corrected coldly. And a poor one. Where is your locker? They entered the cramped, foul-smelling break room. Clara pointed numbly to a dented grey metal locker in the corner. Vincent opened it. Inside hung a threadbare grey wool coat she had bought at a thrift store. At the bottom sat a cheap canvas tote bag. Vincent stared at the coat. Disgust rippled across his features. He reached in, grabbed it by the collar, and tossed it into the trash can next to the lockers. Hey! Clara lunged forward, but her belly hit his arm, stopping her short. Before she could protest further, Vincent was shrugging out of his own custom-tailored charcoal overcoat. The residual warmth of his body clung to the silk lining. He stepped behind her and draped the heavy wool over her shoulders. It swamped her, falling past her knees, smelling intoxicatingly of him. He didn't bother with the canvas bag. "Let's go," he said, turning back toward the diner floor. Frankie was waiting by the front door. He had a stack of $100 bills resting on the cash register. Mr. Henderson was nowhere to be seen. Clara walked in a daze, the heavy coat weighing her down. She paused at the door, looking back at the bucket of dirty water, the shattered glass of the coffee pot, the spilled black liquid on the floor. Her miserable, safe, exhausting life, over in the span of 5 minutes. Vincent didn't look back. He opened the glass door, stepping out into the freezing rain. A black armored SUV sat idling by the curb, headlights cutting through the downpour. Dino was holding an umbrella, his eyes constantly scanning the empty highway and the dark tree line beyond the diner's parking lot. Vincent kept a firm hand on the small of Clara's back, guiding her through the rain. The touch burned through the wool of the coat. Dino opened the heavy, reinforced rear door. Clara climbed in clumsily, hauling her heavy frame up into the soft, immaculate black leather interior. The contrast from the hard plastic chairs of the diner was jarring. It was the scent of wealth, power, and danger. Vincent slid in next to her. The door slammed shut with a heavy, airtight thud that locked out the sound of the rain. The silence inside the cabin was total. "Drive," Vincent ordered the driver. The SUV pulled away smoothly, leaving the flickering neon sign of the Silver Spoon behind in the rearview mirror. Clara huddled against the passenger door, pulling Vincent's coat tighter around herself. She stared out the tinted window at the passing dark trees. Her heart was beating frantically. She had spent 8 months looking over her shoulder, terrified he would find her. Now that he had, the reality was worse than the nightmare. She was trapped. Again. But this time, she wasn't just risking herself. She pressed a hand to the side of her stomach. The baby had finally settled down, lulled by the smooth motion of the expensive vehicle. Vincent sat rigidly on his side of the bench seat. He didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead at the partition separating them from the driver. "When is the due date?" he asked. The question hung in the quiet air, a demand rather than a request. Clara kept her eyes on the window. 5 weeks, Vincent calculated silently. "You haven't seen a proper doctor." "I go to a free clinic," she said defensively. "They have an ultrasound machine. He's fine." The word hung in the air. Vincent turned his head slowly to look at her. Even in the dim light of the passing street lamps, Clara could see the shift in his expression. The ruthless, calculating mob boss fractured again, revealing something raw, possessive, and terrifyingly human. "A son." The words were barely a whisper, slipping from his lips like a prayer and a threat all at once. Clara swallowed hard, closing her eyes. She had given him the one piece of ammunition he needed to never, ever let her go again. "Yes," she whispered back. Vincent reached across the wide expanse of the leather seat. Clara tensed, expecting him to grab her wrist again, or perhaps cup her chin to force her to look at him. But his hand bypassed her face, bypassing her arms. His large, calloused hand rested gently, but with absolute ownership directly on the center of her swollen stomach. The heat of his palm seared through the cheap polyester of her uniform. Clara gasped softly, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to pull back, to press herself deeper into the door, but his hand followed, relentless. "Mine," Vincent said softly. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to the child hidden beneath her skin. "And no one will ever hide you from me again." The private elevator to the penthouse did not hum. It didn't rattle or shake like the freight lift at the diner. It moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency, swallowing the floors of the city in a matter of seconds. Clara stood in the back corner of the brushed steel box, leaning heavily against the mirrored wall. Her legs felt like lead. The adrenaline that had spiked in the diner was evaporating, leaving behind a bone-deep, hollow exhaustion. She kept her arms wrapped around Vincent's heavy wool coat, burying her face in the collar to block out the sharp, sterile scent of ozone in the elevator. Vincent stood perfectly still in the center of the car. He watched her reflection in the steel doors. He noted the way her knees trembled. He saw the grey pallor of her skin, completely devoid of the flush of health she'd carried when she was his wife. "You're pale," he stated. It wasn't a question of concern, it was an assessment of a failing asset. "I've been standing on concrete for 9 hours. Clara replied, not looking up. "I'm pregnant, not dying." "That is a matter of perspective." The doors slid open. Total suffocating silence greeted them. The penthouse was a fortress suspended 80 stories above the street. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the storm swallowing the city, but the glass was ballistic, 2 inches thick, bulletproof, bomb-resistant, and entirely soundproof. The floors were poured concrete, polished to a dark, mirror-like finish, accented by stark, brutalist leather furniture. It felt less like a home and more like a high-altitude bunker. Sit," Vincent ordered, pointing to a massive charcoal sofa that anchored the center of the living room. Clara didn't argue. Her body wouldn't let her. She shuffled forward, her cheap, grease-stained sneakers squeaking pathetically against the floorless floor. She sank into the deep cushions, sinking so low that her knees rode up awkwardly around her swollen stomach. She winced, pressing a hand to her lower back. Vincent unbuttoned his suit jacket. He didn't sit. He paced. He walked to a sleek black console against the far wall, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass, and downed it in a single motion. The heavy front doors of the penthouse opened. Frankie stepped in, immediately followed by a slight, grey-haired man carrying a battered leather medical bag. "Dr. Keller," Vincent said, setting the empty glass down with a sharp clink. "Thank you for coming on short notice." Dr. Keller didn't look tired, despite the 3 a.m. call. He was the syndicate's private physician, a man well compensated to ignore gunshot wounds, erratic hours, and the identities of his patients. "Vincent, where is the patient?" Vincent nodded toward the sofa. Keller walked over, his professional mask slipping for just a fraction of a second when he saw Clara. He remembered her from a year ago, draped in diamonds at a syndicate gala, holding court with a terrifying, radiant grace. Now she looked like a refugee. "Mrs. Rossi?" Keller said softly, opening his bag. "It's just Clara," she muttered, letting her head fall back against the leather. "And I don't need a doctor. I need sleep." "Humor me," Keller said, pulling out a blood pressure cuff. He wrapped it around her bare arm. The fabric of her diner uniform rode up, exposing skin that was pale and dotted with faint bruises from bumping into kitchen counters. Vincent stood 10 feet away, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes burning holes into the doctor's hands. The cuff hissed as it inflated. Keller watched the gauge, his brow furrowing slightly. He released the air, took his stethoscope, and placed it against her back, instructing her to breathe. Then he moved to her stomach. Clara stiffened, her hands instinctively moving to guard her belly. "It's all right," Keller murmured, just checking the fetal heart rate. He pressed a cold Doppler monitor against her stomach. A beat of static filled the quiet room, followed by a rapid, rhythmic, galloping sound. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Vincent stopped breathing. His rigid posture broke. He took 2 slow steps toward the couch, his eyes wide, fixated on the small plastic device in the doctor's hand. The sound of the heartbeat was deafening in the silent penthouse. It was fast. It was strong. It was undeniable proof of life. "Heart rate is strong, 150 beats per minute," Dr. Keller said, offering a tight smile. He packed the device away. The room plunged back into silence. Keller stood up and turned to Vincent. He didn't mince words. "The baby is fine. She is not. Her blood pressure is dangerously high. She is severely malnourished, dehydrated, and carrying entirely too much tension in her lumbar spine. If she continues on her feet, she will go into premature labor, and given her current physical state, I cannot guarantee her body will survive the trauma." Vincent's jaw locked. The muscles in his neck strained against his collar. He looked at Clara, his eyes dark with a violent, possessive fury. "Frankie!" Vincent snapped. Frankie stepped forward from the shadows near the door. "Yeah, boss. Go to the diner. Burn it." Clara jerked upright, panic seizing her chest. "Vincent, no! There are innocent people there. Mr. Henderson." "I don't care about Mr. Henderson!" Vincent roared, the sheer volume of his voice cracking the glass-like silence of the room. He pointed a finger at her. "You risked my son for a minimum wage job. You starved yourself to hide from me. I starved because you froze my real accounts!" Clara yelled back, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "I had nothing!" Vincent stepped into her space, leaning over the couch until he was inches from her face. "You had me. You had an empire. You chose a slum." He turned back to his capo. "Frankie, buy the diner. Fire everyone. Then tear the building down to the dirt. If she tries to go back, I want there to be nothing left to return to." When Clara woke, she didn't know what time it was, or what day. The heavy blackout curtains of the master bedroom were drawn shut, sealing the room in total darkness. She was lying on a mattress that felt like a cloud, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than her entire yearly salary at the diner. Her cheap, grease-stained uniform was gone. Someone, a maid most likely, summoned in the dead of night, had bathed her and dressed her in a loose silk slip. She turned her head. A small lamp clicked on in the corner of the room. Vincent was sitting in a winged armchair, bathed in the low, amber light. He had finally taken off his tie, and the top 2 buttons of his shirt were undone. He was holding a tablet, the harsh blue glow illuminating the deep, bruised circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept. He had just sat there, watching the bed, guarding the cage. "Thirsty?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, stripped of the booming authority from the night before. Clara nodded slowly, pushing herself up against the massive headboard. Every joint in her body ached, but the crushing fatigue was gone. She must have slept for 10 hours. Vincent set the tablet down. He poured a glass of ice water from a silver pitcher on the nightstand and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. His were freezing. Hers were burning with the elevated body heat of the 3rd trimester. Clara drank the water greedily, her throat dry and raspy. When she lowered the glass, she found him staring at her belly again. The silk slip clung to the massive curve of it. "You look—" Vincent started, then stopped. The ruthless boss of the underworld was struggling to find a word that wouldn't sound like a weakness. "You look like a mother." "I am a mother," Clara said quietly. "Or I will be. Soon." Vincent leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "Why didn't you tell me, Clara? When you handed me those papers in the lawyer's office, why didn't you say something? Would you have let me go?" The silence that followed was heavy and thick. Vincent looked at the floor, his jaw tightening. "No," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I would have burned the city to ash before I let you walk out that door with my child. That is exactly why I didn't tell you," Clara said, her voice trembling but resolute. She set the glass down. "Look around you, Vincent. Look at this room." Vincent looked up. "It's secure. The glass can stop a .50 caliber round. The doors require biometric clearance. You are perfectly safe." "I am perfectly trapped!" Clara fired back, her frustration boiling over. "It's a vault! You lock your money in vaults, you lock your guns in vaults. I am not property, Vincent, and neither is this baby. You think I enjoy the vault?" Vincent stood up, his sudden movement restless, caged. He paced to the window and tore back the heavy curtain. Grey, washed-out daylight flooded the room. The city stretched out below them, sprawling and insignificant. "You think I want to live behind armor plating?" he asked, pointing down at the streets. "There is a war out there, Clara. The Falcone Syndicate is bleeding my territory dry in the south. My own lieutenants are getting hungry. Weakness is an invitation for a bullet. You think you were living a noble, independent life in that diner? You were a sitting duck. If the Falcones had found you—" He stopped, closing his eyes, suppressing a physical shudder. The thought of it was acid in his veins. "They didn't find me," Clara argued. "I was a nobody. I was a ghost. No one looks twice at a pregnant waitress in a bad part of town." "I look twice," Vincent said, turning to face her. His eyes were entirely black, devoid of light. "And if I can find you, they can find you. And they wouldn't have brought you a doctor, Clara. They would have cut that child out of you to send me a message and left you to bleed to death on the linoleum." Clara flinched, her hands instinctively flying to her stomach. The brutal, unfiltered reality of his words struck her like a physical blow. She hated him for saying it, but she hated it more because she knew it was true. "I couldn't raise him in the estate," Clara whispered, the fight suddenly draining out of her. She looked down at her hands, still red and raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals. "I remember what it was like. The bodyguards at the grocery store, the sweeps of the cars for explosives, the men bleeding on the carpets in the middle of the night. I watched you lose pieces of your soul to this business, Vincent. I watched you turn into stone." She looked up, meeting his cold, dark eyes. "I couldn't let my son watch his father turn into a monster." Vincent stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He didn't defend himself. He didn't deny it. He simply accepted the verdict of his ex-wife with a cold, terrifying grace. "I am a monster," Vincent agreed softly. He walked back to the bed, leaning over her, his presence utterly overwhelming. "But I am the monster that keeps the other monsters away. And right now, that is exactly what you need." The illusion of domestic peace, however fraught and bitter it was, shattered just past noon. Clara was sitting at the massive marble island in the kitchen, forcing down a bowl of fresh fruit and steel-cut oats that the chef had prepared. Vincent sat across from her, drinking black coffee, reading reports on his tablet. It was almost a facsimile of their old married life, if one ignored the heavy silence and the sheer, unspoken terror hanging in the air. The biometric lock on the front door chimed. Frankie walked in. He didn't bother knocking. His face was grim, his suit jacket open, revealing the shoulder holster strapped to his chest. He stopped at the edge of the kitchen, his eyes darting briefly to Clara before locking onto Vincent. "Boss, we got a problem?" Vincent didn't look up from his screen. "Speak." "It's about the diner," Frankie said, his voice dropping an octave. "I went down there with a crew this morning to handle the buyout like you asked. The place was taped off. Cops everywhere." Vincent's finger stopped swiping on the glass. He slowly raised his head. The temperature in the room plummeted. "Why?" "A hit?" Frankie said, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "Professional job. Walked in around 5 a.m. right after we left. Shot up the back booths, torched the kitchen, left a message painted on the wall." Clara's spoon slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the marble bowl. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Who?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Who was hurt?" "Was Mr. Henderson?" Frankie didn't answer her. He looked at Vincent. "Who?" Vincent demanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "The Falcone crew?" Frankie confirmed. They didn't find who they were looking for, so they made a mess. Henderson caught 2 in the chest. He's dead. The dishwasher is in critical. Clara clamped a hand over her mouth, a violently sick feeling rising in her throat. 5 a.m., 3 hours after Vincent had dragged her out. If she had fought him harder, if she had managed to slip out the back door and hide in the storeroom, she would be dead, and her baby would be dead. Vincent stood up slowly. He didn't look at Clara. His face was completely blank, devoid of any human emotion. The man who had gently touched her stomach in the SUV, the man who had ordered her a doctor, was gone. The boss of the Rossi syndicate had taken his place. They were looking for her, Vincent stated. "It wasn't a question. Word must have leaked that you were moving around the South Side last night," Frankie said. "They put 2 and 2 together. They know you pulled someone out of that diner." "Do they know who?" "Not yet," Frankie replied. "But they have guys sniffing around the hospitals, looking for pregnant women checking in. They know she was heavy with child. Vincent walked around the kitchen island. His movements were predatory, perfectly calculated. He grabbed his suit jacket off the back of a chair and slid his arms into the sleeves. Find the triggermen," Vincent ordered, adjusting his cuffs. "I don't care how deep into Falcone territory you have to dig. Dig them out. I want them brought to the meatpacking plant on 4th Street. And Falcone?" Frankie asked. "Leave the old man for now. Take his lieutenants. Take their teeth, break their knees, and leave their bodies in the trunks of their own cars parked outside Falcone's estate." Vincent's voice was utterly devoid of mercy. It was an administrative order, a ledger being balanced in blood. Clara sat frozen on the stool. She watched him give the orders, watching the casual way he commanded torture and murder. The reality of his world, the world she had desperately fled, was suddenly, violently crashing through the ballistic glass of the penthouse. Vincent turned to her. He saw the horror in her eyes, the trembling of her hands resting on her swollen stomach. "Finish your food," he said coldly. "You're going to kill them," Clara whispered. "I am going to butcher them," Vincent corrected, stepping closer to her. He braced his hands on the marble counter, trapping her in his shadow. "Because they came for my son. They came for you. And the only language men like Falcone understand is absolute, disproportionate violence." "It's just blood!" Clara cried, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. "It's always just blood with you. It never ends." "It ends when they are all dead," Vincent said softly. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. The touch was brutally tender, a stark contrast to the horrific orders he had just given. "You wanted to live in the real world, Clara? This is the real world. You are my wife. You are carrying my heir. There is no anonymity for you. There is only survival." He pulled his hand back, the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin like a brand. "Do not leave this penthouse," he commanded, looking at Frankie to ensure the capo heard the implicit threat. "If she tries to run, lock her in a room and throw away the key." Vincent turned and walked out the door, the heavy steel locks engaging with a definitive, inescapable click behind him. Clara was left alone in the massive kitchen, the silence of the fortress ringing in her ears. She pressed both hands to her stomach, feeling the baby kick against her palms. The monster had gone to war to protect them. She was safe, and she had never been more terrified in her life. The penthouse was a tomb of high-end luxury. For 3 days, Clara did not see the sun. The storm system that had dragged her back into Vincent's world stalled over the city, battering the ballistic glass with sheets of grey rain. She paced the length of the living room, her cheap sneakers replaced by soft woolen slippers that offered zero comfort to her swelling ankles. She walked from the kitchen island to the massive leather sofa, then to the heavy oak double doors that led to the private elevator. Every time she neared the doors, 2 heavily armed guards, men she didn't recognize, men with flat, dead eyes, shifted their weight. She was a prisoner, a highly valued, fiercely protected prisoner. It was 4:12 a.m. on the 4th day when the elevator chimed. Clara froze by the window, wrapping her arms protectively around her stomach. The heavy doors slid open. Vincent walked in. He looked nothing like the immaculate, tailored king who had stood in the diner. He moved with a heavy, dragging limp. His suit jacket was gone. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up past his elbows. The fabric of his shirt was soaked in blood. It wasn't a fine mist or a stray splatter. The front of his shirt was saturated, drying into a stiff, rusty brown armor. His knuckles were raw, the skin split and swollen. He stopped in the middle of the foyer, breathing heavily, his head bowed. He looked at his hands, watching a fresh drop of crimson slip from his pinky finger to dot the immaculate polished concrete floor. Clara couldn't move. The smell hit her a second later, a thick metallic stench of copper, sweat, and fear. Vincent finally looked up. His eyes were hollowed out, dark pits of exhaustion. He saw her standing by the glass, pale and trembling. "Go back to bed, Clara," he rasped. His voice sounded like it had been dragged over broken glass. He didn't walk toward her. He walked toward the guest bathroom down the hall, purposefully keeping his distance, treating himself like a contagion. Clara stood rooted to the spot. Her mind screamed at her to run to the bedroom, to lock the door, to hide from the reality of what this man did in the dark. She closed her eyes. She saw the quiet, kind face of Mr. Henderson, the diner manager who had sneaked her extra slices of pie. Dead. Because of her. She opened her eyes, pushing herself away from the window. Her back screamed in protest as she followed the trail of blood down the hallway. The bathroom door was open. Vincent was leaning over the marble vanity. The water was running on full blast. He was scrubbing his hands with a stiff bristled brush, the water turning a violent pink as it circled the drain. He wasn't just washing, he was punishing the skin, scraping at it until his own knuckles bled anew. Clara stepped into the doorway. The harsh fluorescent light above the mirror cast deep, skeletal shadows across his face. "You're going to tear the skin off," she said softly. Vincent stiffened. He didn't turn around. "I told you to go to bed, and I told you I am not your property," Clara replied, stepping fully into the bathroom. She reached past him and turned off the faucet. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. She took the brush from his rigid, unyielding grip. He let her. He stood perfectly still, a violent man neutralized by the gentle, deliberate presence of the woman carrying his child. Clara grabbed a thick white towel from the warming rack. She wet a corner of it under the hot water, added a pump of harsh soap, and took his left hand in hers. His fingers were thick, heavy, and bruised. She began to wipe away the blood, working the cloth gently over his split knuckles. "Did you find them?" she asked. Her voice was a flat, deadened monotone. She didn't want to know. She had to know. "Yes." Vincent stared at the wall above the mirror. He wouldn't look at her. "The men who hit the diner, and the lieutenant who gave the order, are they won't ever breathe again," he interrupted, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly calm register. "Falcone knows. He received the message. He knows the South Side belongs to me, and he knows that if he crosses the river again, I won't just kill his men. I will burn his entire lineage to the ground." Clara swallowed the bile rising in her throat. She focused on his hand, wiping the last of the blood from his palm. "You killed them for me. I killed them because it is the only currency my world accepts," Vincent corrected, finally looking down at her. "You think I want this? You think I enjoy coming home to my pregnant wife smelling like an abattoir?" He pulled his hand out of her grip. He braced both hands on the edge of the sink, hanging his head. "I tried to build a wall, Clara, when we were married. I tried to keep the blood on the outside and you on the inside. I thought the money, the houses, the security, I thought it was enough." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "I was a fool. The blood always seeps under the door. You saw that. That's why you ran." Clara looked at his bowed spine. The terrifying boss of the Rossi family looked broken. "I ran because I was drowning," Clara whispered. She reached out, placing a hand on his back. The muscles beneath his ruined shirt were coiled as tight as industrial springs. "I couldn't breathe in that house. I couldn't look at you and pretend I didn't know how the bills were paid." Vincent turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "And now?" "Now," Clara said, her hand dropping to rest protectively over the heavy weight of her stomach. "I realize that out there in the real world, the wolves don't care if you're a good person. They just want to eat." She looked down at the pink-stained towel in her hands. "You are a monster, Vincent, but you are the father of this child, and if the choice is between you and the men who shot up that diner—" She took a slow, shuddering breath. "I choose you." Vincent stared at her. The air in the small bathroom shifted, heavy with an unspoken, tragic covenant. He didn't smile. He didn't pull her into a romantic embrace. The reality of their lives was too ugly for romance. He simply reached out, his clean hand resting gently over hers on the swell of her stomach. "I will never let them touch you," he swore, a vow sealed in the blood drying on his shirt. Never. 3 weeks later, the suffocating heat of late summer baked the city concrete, but inside the penthouse, the air conditioning hummed with a sterile, icy perfection. Clara was 39 weeks pregnant. Her body was no longer her own. It was a stretched, aching vessel. Sleep was impossible. Standing was agony. Sitting brought a crushing pressure to her ribs. She spent most of her days sitting in the customized orthopedic chair Dr. Keller had ordered, staring out at the hazy skyline. Vincent was rarely gone for more than a few hours. The syndicate was restructuring. The hit on the diner had sparked a cold war with the Falcone family, and the streets were quiet, the terrifying, breathless quiet that always precedes an explosion. It happened at 9:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. Clara was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of ice water. Vincent was at the dining table, disassembling and cleaning his sidearm, the sharp, metallic clicks of the weapon echoing rhythmically. Without warning, the penthouse plunged into absolute, pitch-black darkness. The hum of the air conditioning died. The refrigerator cut out. Clara gasped, dropping her glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sharp sound swallowed by the sudden, oppressive silence of the high-rise. "Don't move." Vincent's voice snapped from the darkness. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a tactical command. She heard the swift, metallic slide of a magazine locking into the grip of his gun, followed by the terrifying clack of a round being chambered. Red emergency lights flickered to life along the baseboards of the penthouse, casting the living room in a bloody, sinister glow. The backup generators had kicked in, but only for critical systems. Vincent materialized beside her, his hand wrapping tightly around her bicep. His eyes were scanning the darkened windows, tracking the shadows. "The grid didn't go down," Vincent whispered, pointing out the window. The rest of the city skyline was blazing with lights. "They cut the power to the building. This is an organized breach." A heavy, concussive thud echoed from deep within the building, vibrating through the soles of Clara's swollen feet. "Explosives on the ground floor," Vincent said, pulling her away from the kitchen island. They hit the main lobby doors. The front door of the penthouse slammed open. Clara screamed, stumbling backward, but Vincent stepped cleanly in front of her, his weapon raised, perfectly aimed at the doorway. "Hold fire! Boss, it's me!" Frankie barked, stepping into the red emergency light. He was breathing hard, a tactical rifle slung across his chest. Dino was right behind him, dragging a heavy equipment bag. "Report," Vincent demanded, lowering the weapon a fraction of an inch. "Falcone!" Frankie spat, locking the heavy deadbolts on the front door. He didn't send a hit squad. He sent an army. They hit the parking garage and the lobby simultaneously. They knocked out the primary comms and the security feed. We have maybe 40 guys coming up the stairwells. The elevators are dead. How long until they reach this floor? 10 minutes, maybe less. They're blowing the fire doors as they come. Frankie looked at Clara, his face grim. "We need to move to the panic room. The extraction chopper can't land on the roof in this wind." Vincent turned to Clara. "Walk fast." They moved down the long hallway toward the master suite. The panic room was a reinforced steel vault hidden behind the walk-in closet, equipped with independent ventilation, medical supplies, and a direct, hard-wired line to the syndicate's external security forces. Clara forced her heavy legs to move. The adrenaline coursing through her veins masked the dull ache in her spine. But as she stepped into the closet, a sudden, violent cramp seized her lower abdomen. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a vicious, crushing band of steel tightening around her waist. Clara gasped, her knees buckling. She grabbed the edge of a mahogany dresser to stop herself from collapsing, knocking a row of expensive colognes to the floor. "Clara!" Vincent caught her under the arms, hauling her upright. She couldn't speak. The pain robbed her of oxygen. She gripped his forearms, her nails digging into his skin through his shirt. She squeezed her eyes shut, riding out the agonizing wave. When it finally receded, she opened her eyes. She looked down. A dark, heavy stain was spreading down the inner thigh of her light grey sweatpants, dripping onto the carpet. Her water had broken. "No!" Clara whispered, sheer terror entirely eclipsing the fear of the men climbing the stairs. "No, not now. Please, not now." Vincent stared at the floor. The ruthless tactician, the man who could calculate casualty rates and coordinate a defense in seconds, froze entirely. "Boss!" Frankie yelled from the hallway. "They breached the 70th floor! We gotta lock down!" Vincent's head snapped up. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a terrifying, primal focus. He scooped Clara into his arms. She cried out, the shift in gravity sending a fresh spike of pain through her pelvis, but she wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. He carried her into the panic room. It was a bleak, concrete box illuminated by harsh LED strips. A heavy steel cot bolted to the floor sat in the center, surrounded by metal cabinets of ammunition, MREs, and medical trauma kits. He set her down gently on the cot. "Dino!" Vincent barked. Dino stepped into the vault, tossing the heavy equipment bag into the corner. "Yeah, boss. Get on the hard line. Call Dr. Keller. Tell him if he isn't in this building in 5 minutes, I will skin him alive. Boss, the lobby is crawling with Falcone's men. Keller can't get through that." "Find a way," Vincent roared, the sound echoing violently off the steel walls. Another contraction hit Clara. It was faster this time, more brutal. She arched her back, a raw, guttural moan escaping her lips. She gripped the metal edge of the cot, her knuckles turning white. "It's happening," Clara gasped, locking eyes with Vincent. The fear in her face mirrored his own. "He's coming." Frankie stood in the doorway, staring down the dark hallway of the penthouse. "They're on our floor. I hear them." Vincent turned his back to Clara. He racked the slide of his gun. He looked at Frankie. "Lock the vault door," Vincent ordered. "You and Dino hold the hallway. Buy us time." "There's 40 of them, boss," Frankie said quietly, the grim reality of the math settling over them. "I don't care if there's 100, Vincent said. "You hold the line." Frankie nodded slowly. He stepped out of the vault. Vincent grabbed the heavy steel handle of the vault door and pulled it shut. The massive locking mechanisms engaged with a heavy, definitive sequence of metallic thuds. They were sealed in. A king, his runaway queen, and an heir demanding to be born in a tomb of concrete and steel. The sound of gunfire started 3 minutes later. It was muffled by the thick steel of the vault door, but the vibration of the automatic weapons rattled the heavy metal cabinets. It was a dull, rhythmic thumping, punctuated by the sharper, concussive blasts of breaching charges, tearing apart the beautiful, expensive penthouse Vincent had built. Inside the vault, the world was reduced to pain and blood. "Breathe, Clara," Vincent ordered. He had stripped off his jacket and his gun holster, tossing them onto a crate of ammunition. His sleeves were rolled up. His hands, usually instruments of violence and control, were pressed against her knees, anchoring her. "I can't!" Clara screamed, her voice tearing her throat. She thrashed on the narrow cot, her clothes soaked in sweat and amniotic fluid. The pain was an ocean, pulling her under, drowning her in blinding white agony. "You can. You have to." Vincent's voice was steady, but his face was drawn, pale beneath the harsh LED lights. He tore open a trauma kit from the wall, scattering combat gauze and tourniquets onto the floor until he found a sterile field sheet and heavy surgical scissors. He was operating purely on primal instinct, adapting the battlefield triage he knew to the terrifying reality of childbirth. Another muffled explosion shook the room. Dust rained down from the concrete ceiling. "They're going to get in!" Clara sobbed, panic hyperventilating her lungs. "They're going to kill him! Look at me!" Vincent commanded, stepping directly into her line of sight. He gripped her face in his hands. His palms were hot, strong, and deeply anchoring. "No one is getting through that door. You focus on me. You focus on this child. Push!" Clara screamed, bearing down with everything she had. Her body felt like it was being torn in half. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing violently as the building's electrical systems failed entirely, leaving only the sickening red glow of the deepest emergency backups. Outside the door, the gunfire intensified into a deafening roar. Frankie and Dino were fighting a losing battle. The sound of heavy boots hitting the hardwood of the master bedroom outside the closet seeped through the steel. Clang! A bullet ricocheted off the exterior of the vault door. Vincent didn't even flinch. He kept his eyes locked on Clara, his hands steady. Again, Clara, harder. He's almost here. She drew a ragged, desperate breath and pushed. She poured every ounce of her fear, her exhaustion, and the bitter survival instinct she had honed in the dirty diner into the effort. She pushed until blood vessels popped in her eyes, until the world narrowed to a pinpoint of red light. And then the pressure vanished. A sharp, piercing cry cut through the heavy air of the vault, louder and truer than the gunfire outside. Clara collapsed back onto the steel cot, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't see. She could only hear. Vincent stood perfectly still at the foot of the cot. In his large, blood-stained hands, he held a tiny, writhing, slick weight. The boy was furious, his face purple, his small fists punching blindly at the cold air of the bunker. Vincent stared at his son. For the first time in his entire life, the boss of the Rossi Syndicate forgot to breathe. The cold, impenetrable armor he wore to survive his brutal world cracked, shattered, and fell away entirely. His dark eyes filled with tears, spilling over his lashes to track down his dust-covered face. He didn't see an heir to a criminal empire. He didn't see a pawn to be protected behind ballistic glass. He saw a child, a fragile, innocent, perfect life. Vincent wrapped the baby in a sterile white trauma sheet, moving with a terrifying gentleness. He walked around the cot and knelt beside Clara's head, lowering the crying infant onto her chest. Clara pulled the heavy bundle to her skin, weeping uncontrollably. She buried her face in the damp, dark hair on her son's head. The smell of him was overwhelming, pure, new, and alive. Vincent leaned over them, wrapping his arms around both his wife and his son, burying his face in Clara's neck. The three of them huddled on the steel cot, a desperate, bleeding island in a sea of violence. Outside the door, the gunfire abruptly stopped. Total suffocating silence fell over the penthouse. Vincent slowly raised his head. His expression hardened, the father receding, the killer returning to the surface. He reached out, his hand closing over the grip of his discarded pistol. He stood up, positioning himself between the cot and the vault door, pointing the weapon dead center at the steel. A heavy knock echoed against the metal. "Boss?" Frankie's voice came through the thick door. It was weak, ragged, and wet with blood. "It's clear. We held them. Backup just came up the stairwell. The Falcone crew is wiped out." Vincent lowered the gun, a heavy exhale shuddering through his massive frame. He didn't open the door. Not yet. He turned back to look at Clara. She was staring down at the baby, her face pale, bruised, and breathtakingly beautiful in the red emergency light. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the cynical, devastating reality of their existence. They had survived tonight. But tomorrow, there would be another rival, another hit, another bunker. Vincent walked back to the cot. He touched the baby's small, balled-up fist with a single finger. "I thought I could force you to live in my world," Vincent said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. He wasn't giving a command. He was offering a surrender. "I thought the cage was big enough, strong enough to make you happy." Clara looked at him, her heart aching. "The cage is still a cage, Vincent." "I know." Vincent looked from the baby to Clara. "He will not grow up checking under cars for bombs. He will not learn to wash blood out of my shirts." "How?" Clara asked, her voice cracking. "You are the head of the family. You can't just walk away. They will hunt us to the ends of the earth." "No, they won't," Vincent said. The cold, terrifying calculation returned to his eyes, but this time it wasn't aimed at an enemy. It was aimed at his own throne. Because by this time tomorrow, the Rossi Syndicate won't exist. I'm going to dismantle the entire network. I will sell the territories, burn the ledgers, and execute anyone who tries to stop the dissolution. Clara stared at him, stunned. You would burn your empire? For us? I would burn the world, Clara. Vincent swore, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss against her sweaty forehead. You wanted freedom. I'm going to buy it for us. In blood, and then never again. He turned and walked toward the heavy steel door to face the ruin of his kingdom. Behind him, in the safe, quiet dark, his son took another breath, oblivious to the fact that his father was about to set the underworld on fire just to keep him warm. Did this intense, gritty Mafia romance keep you on the edge of your seat? The clash between a ruthless king's dark world and the fierce, undeniable love for his runaway queen proves that sometimes the only way to protect your family is to burn your own empire to the ground.